Welcome to Your Story, brought to you today by the Public Speakers Association. I'm so excited to introduce to you the amazing Mr. Story himself, Mr. Ray Thompson. Take it from here.
How are you? I'm glad to really speak to each and every one of you on this evening. And I'm just really excited to be with you on this evening. I would like to share my story with you. It's a somewhat of an unusual story, and but it is one that started out in Pennsylvania and ended in North Carolina. My wife and I had simply planned to move to Raleigh, North Carolina, leaving York, Pennsylvania. And we were planning to move on January the 28th, 2017. We had prepared everything and arranged for the movers and all of that good stuff. And we were just in preparation for relocating to Raleigh, North Carolina. Well, on Friday, January the 27th, something happened. I was somewhat ill prior to, but still didn't think that that would impede my travel. However, it did. My wife tried to wake me up on the 27th of January, and she had no luck. I just somewhat kind of laid there. She tried to wake me up two times and told me to get up and get ready because we were on our way to the doctor's office. And nothing happened. I was still in the same position. She came back in for the third time. This time it was quite critical because we were going to be late for the doctor's appointment. And so she came in and she sat me up in the bed and she turned me around and stood me up and sent me to the bathroom to get ready. Well, I went into the bathroom. I remember coming out of the bathroom and I was standing in front of the sink with my toothbrush in my hand. And my wife came up behind me because she knew something was wrong. She came up behind me and she put toothpaste on the toothbrush. She guided me to brush my teeth. She took me back to the bed and she dressed me from head to toe. After she dressed me, she put my coat on and she told me to walk to the car. So I walked to the car. I was moving quite slow. So she got to the car around the same time I got to the car. And we got in the car and we proceeded to the doctor's office. She told me three times, at least three times, to put my seatbelt on, but for whatever reason, it did not register. So we got to the doctor's office. They called us back, and the nurse asked me to get on the scale. I put 1 foot on the scale, nothing else. And so she told me to get off, told me to get back on again. This time I was able to get back on because I was able to follow directions, but I just didn't know what went next in the whole procedure and process of things. So we went back and we sat down. The doctor came in and he was talking English, but it sounded like a completely different language. I could not comprehend anything that he was saying. And so my wife began to talk to the doctor and so forth and so on. And from there, we went to the hospital. I had some lab work done and I had a procedure done where they drained some fluid out of my abdomen. They drained about 4 liters of fluid out of my abdomen that day. This was probably the third time that I had that procedure done over the course of the month in January. And so after the procedure, we had some lab work done, and there was a nurse that was with us. And she told my wife, she said, "I don't know your husband." She said, "But if he was my husband, I would take him to the ER because something's gravely wrong." So my wife said, "Oh, I'm going to take him to the ER." She said, "But I'll take him later." She said, "No, let's take him now." So they took me to the ER. The nurse wheeled me to the ER. I was in a wheelchair. She wheeled me on to the ER, and the next thing I remember was I was in the back. And they began to take my clothes off, and so I began to resist. And that didn't work out very well because they ended up tying me to the bed. And so they ended up admitting me into the hospital. Unbeknownst to me, my toxin levels in my body had elevated to such an extreme that it had clouded my memory, clouded my mind altogether, where I didn't really know what was going on around me. My children came that night, about 11:30 that night. They drove from North Carolina up to Pennsylvania. And when they walked in, my wife said, "Say hello." And I said, "Hello." And she knew something was wrong with that. So she said, "Say hello to the children." And I looked at them, and I just didn't know who they were. So I didn't know who my children were that night. The next day, my memory came back, and I could recognize my children. And I was actually in the hospital there in York, Pennsylvania for about 5 days or so. It was the following Tuesday where the doctors decided that they could do no more for me and decided that they were going to move me to Hershey Medical in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And so Wednesday evening, they transferred me to Hershey, Pennsylvania. On Thursday, the doctor came in and he said, "Mr. Thompson, I got some news for you." And so I said, "Okay, what's your news?" And he said, "Your liver is failing and you need a liver transplant." And to that, I was very shocked. I could not understand what was really going on. And he said, "You need a liver transplant and you can have the transplant here, but you will have to stay here for a year after the transplant." And I told him, I said, "I can't do that because I don't live here." While I was in the hospital in York, the movers came, as I stated, on the 28th and moved all of my household belongings to Raleigh, North Carolina. So I told the doctor that Thursday, I said, "I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I need to go to a hospital in Raleigh." And the only hospital I knew here in the Raleigh-Durham area was Duke University. And so I told him I needed to go to Duke. He said, "Well, you will have to discuss that with the social worker because she handles all transfers and all of that." So my wife took over, and she said, "I'll work with the social worker and get you transferred." Later on that day, my mother-in-law was there to visit, and along with one of my wife's cousins. And we were in the room, we were talking and just laughing and having a good time. And all of a sudden, nurse came in my room and she looked at my vitals and she ran back out. She came back in with another nurse. And the next thing I realized, there was a doctor in the room. And the doctor was talking to my wife, and I knew something was going on. So I asked my wife what was going on, and she said, "Just be calm." She said, "Everything's okay." I said, "No, something's wrong." And so she finally told me, she said, "Your blood pressure has crashed." And I said, "Okay." The most logical question for me was, what is my blood pressure? And so she didn't want to tell me, but she finally told me, she said, "Your blood pressure is 50/30. And as a result of a procedure that I had had done earlier that day, they had nicked a muscle. And unbeknownst to me, I was bleeding internally, but they didn't know that at the time. And all they knew that was my blood pressure had crashed. And it was 50/30. And what should have happened is I should have flatlined or I should have gone into a coma. Neither one happened. I was sitting up talking to everybody, and things were just kind of moving along. And so they finally got my blood pressure back up, and the day ended. The next day came in, and that Saturday, nurses and doctors came in my room, and they strapped me to the gurney and took me out of the hospital and on my way to Duke University I went. I boarded a plane that night, and I flew from Pennsylvania to North Carolina with a 50-50 chance of survival. I got here to North Carolina, and they began to work on me immediately. And they had to qualify me for the transplant list. And so that Saturday, I qualified for the transplant list. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was the sickest person at Duke University Hospital. And I was the sickest person in their region, which spans 5 states. And so that put me at number 1 on the transplant list. The following day, that Sunday, they came to my wife and they said, we got a liver. And so we were kind of excited. Later on that day, they came back to my wife and they said, well, we got to wait. He has an infection in his body and we got to let this liver go by. And so they began treating the infection. They said it would be about 48 to 72 hours. And so that Tuesday night, they put me back on the transplant list. And Wednesday, they came to my wife and they said, we got another liver. We don't know how this has happened, but we got another liver. So they prepped me for surgery. What happened was that Sunday, my kidneys failed. And when my kidneys failed, they put me in ICU. And my chances of survival went to 1%. I lasted on a 1% chance of survival from Sunday night all the way through to Wednesday. On Wednesday, again, they prepped me for surgery. And Thursday afternoon, I went into surgery. After 7+ hours, 7+ hours, they brought me out of surgery. The entire time I was in ICU, they let my entire family back, as opposed to the 2-person limit. They let my entire family back because they thought I would die every day. And so after the surgery, they let my entire family back just to see me one last time. And they really thought I was going to die. And I didn't die. Friday morning came in. I was still breathing. I woke up Saturday. I began talking uncontrollably on Saturday afternoon. I believe I was having a conversation with God. And I talked to God from Saturday afternoon until Sunday night. They gave me some medicine to put me to sleep. And I went to sleep. I woke up Monday morning. And on Monday morning, they asked me if I was in any pain. I told them that my side something was going on with my side. They took me back into surgery for another 2 hours. And I went into surgery for another 2 hours, came back out. And every day after that day, I started getting better every day. And so after 5 weeks in the hospital, I went to rehab, another version of a hospital. And I was there in rehab for 3 weeks. And after a total of 8 weeks being away from my family, away from my home, I came home. I was discharged on March the 27th. And every day since then has been a wonderful experience for me because I've been improving every day. And so now I am here sharing my story with you and with the world, just letting the world know that where there is life, there is hope. And you too can have hope. I want to let you know that my wife and I wrote a book. The book is entitled 1%. And I would love for you to email me at information at Thompson, THOMPSON, life, LIFE, line, LINE, or call me at 919-617-1741. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you this evening.